Hi, I'm Uma Raj and welcome to Excel 2019 Fundamentals. We are going to learn about an Excel feature used to control, restrict and limit what a user can enter into a cell, and that is called data validation. It is useful when you share the workbook with others and you want the data to be accurate and consistent. We will go through the fundamentals before we dive into some real examples. The data validation tool is on the data tab in the data tools group, and when you click on that down arrow here, it will open a dialog box when you click on the data validation. And the first tab is the settings. This is where you set all your criteria. You can have options like all these data type, and you have all these conditions when you select one of the data types. And you can even have minimum and maximum. You can have a whole number or a decimal, which will permit and allow from a specified range, and that range can have all these conditions like between, not between any of these conditions, and also the maximum and minimum. You can have a list which will permit the entry from a predefined list, and you can specify a source for your list. You can have a time and date which will permit or allow from a specified or certain time frame, and again you can have all these conditions. You can have a text length which will specify the number of characters, and you can also have a custom which is valid. It is based on a formula for your custom criteria. Now you can have an input message which will display before the user starts entering data as a warning, as a reminder. You can also have an error alert which will be displayed when a user enters a wrong value or a not allowed data into the range. So we will look at the first example here, and you can also have a circle invalid data, where if you have some invalid data you can have that value circled, and you can also clear that validation circles. Now we are going to see our first example. In our first example, it's a student table with the scores for math, science and English, and we want to restrict these cells with three different kinds of data validation rules. Okay, select the first one for the math column, click on the data validation, and here we want to restrict these numbers to be whole numbers, and it should be between 50 and 100. So we are going to select whole number here, and the condition is between, and the minimum is 50 and the maximum is 100. And we are going to set up an input message which will appear even before the user starts putting data as a warning or as a reminder, and our heading is any meaningful heading like a title, like grades, and the input message is should be between 50 and 100, and click OK to accept it. Now once you start, see it's already appearing here, the grade should be between 50 and 100. So I'm going to say 55, that's allowed, 67, that's also allowed, 72, 81 and 88. So we entered all the allowed values to the math column for the math scores. So now we are going to set up the science scores data validation for this range. Select the range, go to the data validation tool, click on the tool, click on settings, and here we want the sign scores to be whole numbers again, and it is between, the condition is between, and the minimum is 75 and the maximum is 100. And instead of setting up an input message, this time we are going to have an error alert. The error alert will appear or will be displayed even when the user enters the wrong data into the cell. So it can be, the style can be information, the title is any meaningful title like grades, and the message can be the same. It should be between, our range is 75 and 100. Accept that, click OK. Now we are going to start entering values. 75, that is permitted. 87, that's also between 75 and 100. This time we are going to put a wrong value here, 87. Before we accept that, before we enter, it says should be between 75 and 100, and we have the option of either say OK to keep that value or cancel and enter a new value. So I'm going to cancel that, and I'm going to say, oh, it is 87 again. The next one is 67. When I enter, it again say that this time I'm going to keep that value, 67, and 91, that is also a permitted value. Now we have a one wrong value in this column, so we can have this circle invalid data tool. So when I click on that, it will put a circle in around that wrong value. I mean, just as a note to the users. And for the English, we don't want to give any scores here. We just want to give a pass or fail. So we select that range. Instead of that whole number, we are going to select a list, and the list is the source is we have just only two values, so we don't have a big list of any source here from the workbook. So we can just type it because it's just short and just two values. So we will say fail, and we just have this in cell drop down, so it will show in a drop down list, and we have this ignore blank, so we can check it. So the system will ignore any blanks in any of your allowed data types. Okay, and we don't want any input message or error alert here because we already know we are selecting from a range. So we just click OK, and when you come here, it already put that drop down list, so we can just select pass or fail. So the user can pick only from these two values. So if you want to restrict your values from a list, you can always put that list as a data validation, so they cannot enter any other values. We can remove this circle by coming here and click on the data validation and say clear validation circle, and it will disappear. In the next example, we will see how data validation can be useful when working with functions. And here we are using VLOOKUP as an example, and I have included a link to a VLOOKUP function video in the description box for your reference. So we are restricting the data for the student names column to be picked from a list. This is to reduce the errors when we are using that value in the function. So we will see how we will do that. We already selected the student names, that is our source list, and already given a name students. So instead of giving the range as C18 to C36, we can use the name students. So we will come here, we want to set up the data validation for these three cells as an example. So come to data validation, click on that, option is list, and your source is the name students, because that represents that range C18 to C36 students. click OK, and we already see there is a list. So, we can pick the name. First name is Amy, and it's showing the math grade for Amy because it's picking the value from the lookup table in the second column, and for science it's picking the third value for the third column, because the third argument is the column from which you want the value. So, the next example, we will pick another name as Dan. So, this way you are avoiding all the manual data entry errors, any extra space, any misspelled word or anything. So, your function will work fine. So, in this example, we will come here, we are going to drag it down one step. So, it's looking at the name here in the left column, and it goes to the lookup table and it picks the value for math, which is in the second column. Again, we will copy the science grade here. It does the same, but it picks the value from the third column. We will look one more name here. We will pick up Frank. Again, we are instead of just manually writing the function, we are just copying it. That's all we are doing. Frank, the math grade is 90. So, it's picking the second looking at the second column and picking the value. Here it will look at the third column and it will pick the grade for science. All right. So, that is how we can do data validation to reduce or minimize our errors when working with functions. In the next example, we want to set up a data validation criteria for the budgeted amount for this table, because we have some expenses here and we have some budgeted amount for those expenses, and our criteria is that the total for all these expenses should be less than $12,000 or it should not exceed $12,000. So, we will select this and we are going to use a custom option here. Click on the data validation, click on custom, and the custom, you know, it's coming from a formula. So, our formula is that all these cell values together should be less than or equal to $12,000. So, formula equal to, and the total is the sum function. So, we will see sum, and we are going to select the range and make it absolute. So, it will not move when the function moves. Select, and how do you make it absolute? By clicking the F4 key. So, it is absolute, and the total value should be less than or equal to 12,000. Click OK. So, we right now it's within the limit. So, we can just add one or two values. So, when it exceeds, it gives an system errors, because we did not set up any error alert. So, it will give a system error saying it does not match the data validation restriction defined for this cell. So, you can just say retry and enter a different value, or you can cancel and try a new value. So, that is how you restrict the total for a range to be within some limit. And next example, we have a table of products and the reviews, and our criteria is that the review characters should be less than or equal to 20 characters. So, we can do it in two different ways. We will select this. The easier way is to set up a text length, and we can say it's less than or equal to, and we can just say maximum it can have 20 characters, and when you say OK, you can enter. When it exceeds more than 20, it will give an error message. So, we can also do it in a different way using custom and a formula. Again, you select the range, come to the data validation and select custom, and here what we are going to do is length of each cell. Length function will determine how many characters are there in that cell, including the space. So, we will set up a length function for the cell. So, it should be less than or equal to 20 characters. So, equal to len is the function length of the first cell, because when you move, it moves to the next one using that referencing, cell referencing. By default it will move to the next cell down. So, you can just leave it like this, length of this less than or equal to 20. Oops, 20 and OK. So, I have included the function here to show what is the length of each cell. So, you will know how much is more. So, here it is only 11. So, it's allowed. Here it is 9. So, that is also allowed. So, we will enter something little more. We are happy, but we want to return or something. See, when you enter, you can just say cancel, so it will remove. If you say retry, it will wait for you to reduce it. So, we will say something, but and enter. So, it's already 17 characters here. So, it should not be more than 20. So, we can enter one more. The product is good and enter. So, it's 19, it's already 19. So, if you put two more characters, it won't let you go beyond that. So, it's how you set up a data validation criteria for a range using the custom settings and a formula. So, in this tutorial, we just learned the basics of data validation and a few examples with different options and conditions, including custom settings. So, if you like this video, please give a thumbs up and subscribe. We will see soon with another Excel fundamentals. And in the meanwhile, play with Excel and practice. And thank you for watching.